Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It is Thursday, March 20th, 2025, and we do have a quorum. First on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion? Susan, seconded by Simi. All those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you so much. That passed unanimously. Next, 1.2, we have public comment. Deb, I don't see anyone in the gallery. Is there anyone online who wishes to speak?
We have no public comment.
Okay, we will close this public comment and we will move on to 1.3, general announcements. I have a couple. First, I'm very excited to welcome Georgia Valentine, our new appointee from Ypsilanti Township. We're so glad to have you here with us this evening. And I was wondering if you wanted to take a moment and introduce yourself. Give us a little.
Yes, hello. My name is Georgia Valentine. I am happy to be here. I was recently appointed by the Ypsilanti Township Board of Directors at their March 4th meeting. This is the first board that I have served on. I'm looking forward to serving the people and working with all you fine individuals.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Next is Transit Employee Appreciation Day was March 18th, just a few days ago. And we just want to say thank you to everyone who works in our industry, especially who works in-house at AAATA, for all the wonderful work that you do, and you support our district with all your wonderful work. So thank you again. And then I wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. So tonight, you see Mike online. He's joining us virtually. And then in a little while, a little bit later, Jesse Miller, one of our board members, will be joining us. The housekeeping is that under the old law after COVID, people who are not able to attend in-person meetings could have a doctor's note and attend virtually and have all the rights as a seated member if they were to be in-house. Mike falls under that category, so you will see him during the processes when we are voting, that we will accept his vote. Jesse does not. He has all the privileges of participating in the meeting, but he will not be able to vote. And I just wanted to clarify any confusion so that when we have that first vote, people aren't stymied. And then that was everything I had. Did anyone have any other communications? Wonderful. Then we're going to go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. I don't have any changes in the consent agenda this time. Does anybody have a motion to approve the consent agenda as it's presented? Rich, seconded by Simi, and all those in favor, raise your hands. All right, thank you so much. Next is ownership linkage, and that is Mr. Rich Chang.
Good evening, everyone. Just two quick updates. The first is that, let's see here, Jeff, Matt, Kathleen, Jesse, and I met with the mayor, city of Ypsi, and also their city manager, had a really great discussion, and the end results and the result they were hoping for is that they have agreed to regularly meet with us. We're actually going to start that in June, and then the cadence I think we're still figuring out, but at least we got a committal from them that we'll be able to meet with them. And then we have scheduled for April 7th a meeting with a group of us with the mayor of Ann Arbor. So between that, we have City of Ypsilanti, City of Ann Arbor, and Ypsi Township are all on board for us to have regular ownership linkage meetings with them. So super excited about that.
Excellent.
That's all I got.
Does anyone have any questions for Rich? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Next is the monitoring financial conditions and activities. I want to say thank you, first of all, to the 8 members who participated in this monitoring report, and then we're going to turn it off to Dina Reed.
Thank you. A monitoring report for financial conditions and activities policy 2.5 is in your board packet on page 15. The staff presented the monitoring report to the board. There were, as you mentioned, several voting members. We presented it after that to the Finance Committee as fully compliant. And after some discussion of the elements included, nothing specific, there were no comments from those who did vote on the monitoring report. There was some discussion, and at the end of that, I believe that the Finance Committee was supporting the initial recommendation of fully compliant to the board. I'm happy to answer any questions about contents of the report, if you have any, but that concludes my comments.
Awesome. The first thing I'd like to do, I'm going to try to change things up just a little bit. So because it goes to committee, I would like to hear from the committee itself first to see what their recommendations were and what their discussion was, and then we can leap off from there. But I think it might help focus our discussion a little bit better. So Mike, I'm putting you on the spot. Finance Committee, financial conditions and activities. Did you guys have any thoughts?
Yes, we met, of course, with Kathleen. I'm with you, no, excuse me. We met with Dina, and she made a more robust report than she gave tonight. We all felt, the entire committee felt it was a very good report, and it was fully compliant, and we recommend that to the board.
Excellent. And did you have a recommendation in terms of how you wanted to receive the report? Did you already say that and I missed it?
Yes, we recommend to the board to fully compliant.
Okay, thank you so much. Knowing that information, and we have several seated members here on the Finance Committee as well, does anyone have any questions for Dina? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Would someone like to make a motion to accept the report? Chris, seconded by Julie. Is there any discussion on the motion itself? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda is 4.2, receiving cash and investments, 2.6, policy monitoring. There were 7 members, thank you so much, for who participated in this monitoring report. And that also is Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. On page 43 of your packet is the Cash and Investments Policy 2.6 Monitoring Report. Staff also submitted this report as fully compliant. And after the board's review, again, we went to the Finance Committee to discuss more details on the report. And it was determined, there were really no comments to discuss from the voting members, but there was discussion of the elements of the report at the Finance Committee. And my recollection is that the Finance Committee was comfortable to move it forward also as fully compliant. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now or after Mike's discussion.
Yeah, Mike, your committee, did anyone, was there any other discussion or things that might be of note that the rest of the board might want to hear?
Well, once again, we did discuss it, and once again, we thought and complimented Dina for the very good job she's done. And of course, if you look at the record, we've approved it without any reservations for several years in a row now. In fact, I might also add that the Finance Committee does actually look at the investments every quarter at the time that the quarterly financial report is done. And so even though we formally review it only once a year, we do actually have the opportunity and do look at it every quarter. So once again, we recommend fully compliant.
Wonderful. Does anyone on the board have any questions for Dina or the Finance Committee? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and would anyone like to make a motion as to how to receive the report? Chris?
To accept the report A as is.
Okay, seconded by Kyra. And any discussion on the motion as it's been presented? All those in favor, raise your hand. Awesome. That passed unanimously. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Knowing that we just had those wonderful reports, this is an opportunity for policy language discussion on any of the reports. Does anyone have any concerns about the policies as they're written? Seeing no discussion, we'll go ahead and move on to 6.1, ridership versus coverage. I wanted to tee this up a little bit. This is a topic, oh, sorry. Did I? Oh, global executive limitations, sorry, Matt. Egg on my face, I apologize. I got all excited thinking I was doing a good job. Next item on the list is 4.3, Global Executive Limitations, and that was Mr. Carpenter.
I'm not sure whether to be heartbroken or like, darn. But
I apologize.
No worries. Thank you. The Global Executive Constraint Monitoring Report is in your packet on packet page 58. I will leave it to the committee to discuss, but I will, a high-level overview. We reported compliance that seemed to be supportive in the board survey from 6 members who were able to complete it. There was a robust discussion at the service committee because in this one, there was a considerable amount of changes in the interpretation this year. It was much more robust in both the interpretation, the rationale, and the evidence. So I think that got a lot of conversations going. I'm sorry Jesse's not here because I know he had many comments himself. But with that, I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, for board discussion.
Simi was kind enough to lead the last service committee meeting. Did you have anything you'd like to share, and how would the committee recommend this report? No problem.
I believe our takeaway was to accept the report as a fully compliant.
I know that Jesse isn't here. Were there any other service committee members that wanted to share any concerns about the report, or was just Mr. Miller? All right. Are there any other questions from the rest of the board with regards to the report for the CEO? All right. Seeing none, we're going to ask for a motion to accept the report as A. Simi, seconded by Susan. Any discussion on the motion itself? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you so much, everyone. Now we can move on to the policy language discussion. And there was no discussion earlier, so we're all set, right? Okay. Then we're going to move on to ridership versus coverage, which I already gave a little spiel on. Or did I give a spiel on it? No. Okay. So I do want to give a spiel. My spiel is that this is a topic from the board's annual plan of work, which is really important, and I'm very excited that staff were able to accommodate us so quickly after identifying our plan of work last month. It is important to note that, especially germane to this conversation, it revolves around ridership versus coverage, which has been a long-standing kind of badminton game with the board as to, is it ridership, is it coverage, is it both when we're discussing ends? And we will be discussing ends later on in the year as we do a deep dive. So this sort of leans right into things that we need to know when we're thinking about our ends. So the report is going to be given by Mr. Forrest Yang.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I didn't expect this so quickly, like your meeting is running so efficiently tonight. Anyway, so I don't know, yeah, okay, I see it's shared the presentation. In your board packet, page 71, there's an issue summary and a little bit background context for this discussion. And then, of course, on page 73 is the PowerPoint. Anyway, so as Jocelyn just mentioned, this has been a long time talking about the priorities, right, and the coverage and ridership. As you probably noticed, I put a frequency behind ridership. This is thanks to Jesse. I don't know if Jesse is online or not. He brought up at one of the committee meetings and talking about why is ridership, why not frequency. I think it got similar questions from other people too. Anyway, so as you all probably know, the ridership frequency has a pretty, like let's say, positive elasticity. The higher frequency correlate to ridership increase. I mean, just at the, when we in the break room talking about London Transit Underground, right? When Susan Polly talking about how frequent the train, like every minute, right? So convenient. People are willing to give up their car and just take train or transit buses, right? So typically, based on our own experience, based on experience from other transit agencies, all the researchers, so higher frequency represent higher ridership. So, but I would like to keep ridership coverage because I think for some materials you've been reading, let's be consistent. That's kind of a concept debate has been going around for a while. So anyway, so for tonight we're going to talk about the concept and then the pros and cons and the trade-offs. And then we're also going to talk about where we are today and what the challenges, opportunities we're facing today and in the future. Then we'll get into the conversation about the concept. I'm not sure how many of you have watched the video, and of course, this is probably third time I'm giving you a presentation on the same topic. Of course, there are always things, some new information, especially related to our services and then our plans. But anyway, so this is a concept. I'm pretty sure some of you are already familiar with the concept. And if you watch the video or read some materials, and basically this is I would say, let's say this is a typical city and town with two corridors with higher density development. So the small dots represent houses, business, and then the street, and then the solid line represents street network. So anyway, so on the left side, for community to try to maximize ridership, and they want to allocate resources to high density corridors in order to achieve that higher frequency and a higher ridership. And then we assume under both scenarios it's a fixed budget, right? You got a fixed budget, you have a limited resource to allocate. So again, because it's a higher frequency, as the service is more attractive, you can attract more people to use it. And then, of course, people living far away may not have access to transit at all. But the good thing about this, you got more transit usage, higher productivity, and then more people shifting from driving, and that kind of an environmental benefit as well. And then along those corridors, it will stimulate more development. So become more higher density, and you can afford getting more services. So on the other side, of course, if a community try to maximum coverage, you want to spread out resources covering all the different neighborhood, I say every neighborhood or every street. So of course, it's kind of there's a sense of equity, but again, sometimes it's hard to define equity because people living along those higher density corridors get really crappy service, right? Because there's so many people living nearby and the buses will be super crowded. A lot of people may not even be able to get on the bus. But outside those two corridors, most buses are going to be empty. Yes, we'll have access to people who may not have access to cars or cannot drive, but how do we want to allocate those resources, right? So that's, of course, an extreme case, like I think both scenarios. Most communities will do both. You have a kind of a balance. For example, on the left side, you may have a few buses running in the other neighborhood, aside from those two key corridors. Both, they all have a pros and cons. There certainly is a trade-off. It's a priority. It's all about a priority for the particular community. I think we have a lot of conversations. It's a balance, right? How much resource you want to allocate on the ridership goal versus how much on the coverage goal. So I want to stop there and see if there's any questions about the concept. Go ahead.
So is overall, I understand the fundamentals around this. I guess the part that I had really a question about is the fact that we actually have frequency in parentheses next to ridership. Because I think that's the whole thing, right? Is like we can increase frequency also for coverage. It just potentially costs more resources, whether it's more buses that we need, et cetera. And so that's why I'm kind of curious why we only put frequency in parentheses with ridership, because to me, that maximum ridership, especially based on that diagram where everything is based on a straight line, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to have more frequency. It's just, it's a more direct path concentrated around where the population is, or maybe it's just the diagram is what's maybe throwing me off.
Right.
Because I would say, for me, it's just maximum ridership versus maximum coverage, and then frequency is the variable that affects whether we
Sure.
decide one or the other.
Yeah, I would say, for the first, let's say the diagram on the left side, you have a shorter distance to run. Let's say you got the same number of buses. You got 100 buses running, either on 2 corridors or 6 corridors. And that's how you gain the frequency. Just because you run the same distance, the more buses you have on the same distance travel, the more frequent the service could be. So that's why we call this on the side is going to be higher frequency. Because we assume same number of buses running, either on 2 bus route or 10 bus routes, right? Suzanne?
Just sort of to follow up on Rich's question, are we assuming the same, you said the same number of buses?
Yeah,
The left one suggests a faster service. So if I'm a customer, I could park in a neighborhood near those corridors and get to work much faster than I'm on the second option, which takes it into the neighborhoods and circles around and
Sure.
catches me there, versus directing people to park right adjacent to those corridors. So are we assuming faster service?
I'm
just not sure I got the apples, oranges.
right. I think the key here is we have the same number of buses. So you only have a 2 corridor, 2 bus route to assign those buses, right? You can run, let's say you got every 5 minutes on those. But if you run on 10 corridors and the same number of buses, you may get like 25 minutes frequency. So 5 minutes, maybe like more like half hour, right? So it's not they're running, they could be fast depending on the arrangement. But for the same distance travel, I mean, there are the same number of buses if you you run the same frequency. But unfortunately, on the right side, you run a lot longer distance because you're covering many, many more corridors, like a streets. So let's assume today we have a Washington corridor, Washington Avenue from Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor. We run every 6 minutes-ish. And then we have a half-hour service everywhere else. Let's assume we are going to take all the resources we have, put on Washington Avenue just to run that service. So instead of having 12 buses-ish today, we're going to have 80 buses put on just Washington Avenue. See how frequent that service could be? That'll be like every minute or two, like every minute-ish. So that's the difference. So you only run one bus route along Washington instead of running all the 30-something across the entire community. So that's kind of the comparison. I think it's apple to apple just because you use the same resources, right? Apply to the exactly same community, like a same network, street network, same density, same development. So the comparison is more like, how do you allocate resources? Either you allocate to higher density development or spread out to everywhere. Doesn't matter how density is in terms of the neighborhood. I don't know if that makes more sense. Okay. All right, good. let's move on. You know, I want to mention, especially new board members, right? You probably the first time you hear this concept, I'm more than willing to sit down one-on-one anytime so we can go through some of the concept or even with our existing services, right? Give you introduction and sort of what we offer, how we operate those things today. Anyway, so if there are any needs, we can do that. So we're talking about a ridership versus coverage concept. And it feels like this is new, like from last 10, 15 years, but it has been there forever, right? I would say since the public transportation existed, planners always have that trade-off, you know, debate. But not through this particular concept, but we use service design standards. And you may not know, we also have our own service design standards as part of the FTA regulation requirement. All the systems have their own service standards. But if you look at, you know, coverage, for example, we always say, so your service should cover 90% of the population. I mean, within 5 minutes walking distance, which means like quarter mile walking distance. So that's very typical in terms of the coverage standard. So we're almost feel like obligated to provide service to the entire community. I mean, covering 90% of the people. And then there's also frequency standard. Actually saying minimum you need to run every half hour during the peak and then 60 minutes during the off peak. So that's a typical, very typical for the size like our community. And then a lot of systems have a productivity, which means you have to, you know, have the boardings per hour reach certain threshold, which means the utilization has to go up to that standard. I mean, each transit system use them differently. Some are focused on coverage. They would say, if the, you know, the particular route running there, but not carrying as many people as like the threshold, they can still stay just because they are there to meet the coverage standard. So even they're not performing very well, not very well used, but it's required to meet the coverage standard. And other system may say, if it does not meet that productivity standard, no, we need to look at it, you know, we need to revise that or we need to discontinue that. I'll give you an example. Quite a long time ago, when Toronto Transit Commission, they're a big city, they had a service standard called cost recovery ratio. So the revenue, passenger revenue, compared to total expenses, need to reach 70%. By the way, we're at roughly 10%. You know, look at me, like typical transit, New York Transit, like 30-something%, right? So Toronto Transit Commission had like that service standard to 70%. So if you cannot reach, you know, in your budget, you need to cut service or increase fares or improve your productivity. So that's kind of their priority, right? You need to have a financial target. And then I remember like even maybe 15 years ago, the greater Toronto area has like a regional transit. Every time they introduce the new bus line, like a regional connection, to require the recovery need to be 80%. So if you cannot meet that 80%, they're not going to even introduce that service. But they've been very successful. Every time they put a regional like a connection, it would become very popular. So their cost recovery is a lot higher. So that's kind of their priority. But of course now they, like a Toronto Transit Commission already moved away from the cost recovery because it's really hard to achieve. Anyway, so that's kind of what we've been doing, dealing with the trade-offs, priorities from the service planning perspective. Okay, let's move on to look at where we are. Look at this map. This is our fixed route and a flex ride service map. Not showing on this map, we still offer, you know, TheRide, the ADA service, and we offer like late night, flex ride, late night holiday, and we have a GO ride. We also have a van ride, which is one pool, service. So just to look at the map and, thinking about all those different type services, we offer pretty reasonable level of service, like I would say 24/7, because including the late night holiday service, there's always service available for people, especially for people who cannot drive, don't want to drive, or they want to give up their car or become a one-car family. So they do have a pretty reasonable transportation alternative in this community, right? But again, certainly we have gaps, right? We have things we always need to improve. If you remember back in 2022, as a part of the millage plan, we introduced, better weekend service, extended late night, because it used to be just Ann Arbor, a small portion of Ypsilanti. Now we're covering the entire service area, the late night holiday service. So, and then we have longer service hours. We introduced express service between Ypsilanti Transit Center and Blake Transit Center. So all of those really made that 24/7 service even better, right? Especially on the weekend. We used to only run hourly service, shorter hours. I think some of you may had that experience. But now we run a pretty longer, matching like a weekday almost, like especially Saturday. And we run every half hour. That becomes a very useful service. Like it's become a viable alternative for a lot of transit riders. So as a result, we see a lot of ridership increase on the weekend. And with that flex ride extension for late night, we reduce like complaints, denials a lot, almost like no denial right now. But of course, I don't want to manage the expectation, right? That's kind of something we need to talk in the future. Anyway, so we provide a really good service, and we kept all the promises from the millage plan. We implemented as of August 2024. So now we start to see some positive result. And also I want to use that weekend service as a really good example. So the riders spoke, we listened, and we implement, and they use that. So it's a really good example. Because we heard a lot about that request. We want a better weekend for the last few years, especially during the long range plan. So we heard it, we done some analysis, and we implement it. Now you see a lot of people use that. So that's really a good example. So in terms of, I want to just quickly, because we're talking about the coverage and the ridership. So in terms of the coverage, you can see there are some gaps. I would probably explain the legend. The blue shaded blue is a quarter-mile coverage, like a buffer from a fixed route service. The bright red is the 15-minute, the frequency is every 15 minutes or better during the daytime. The dark red is peak hour, 15 minutes or better. So you can tell this is our high frequency sort of network and then coverage map. The coverage is pretty decent, and especially when you look at the flex ride coverage. I know there are big gap in Ypsilanti, but we have a flex ride service covering a large neighborhood. Excuse me. But anyway, so, and then going back to the service we provide, and I want to link that to the service and the coverage and ridership concept. It's really hard to sometimes allocate what resources we, consider that as a ridership goal, what resources for coverage. For example, in Ypsilanti, those local buses, the blue, shaded blue area, a lot of those riders actually transfer at Ypsilanti Transit Center and get on the number 4 or express and continue to like hospital, university, and then transit center. So it's hard to allocate those, the entire resource coverage, but they're kind of a balanced, right? So anyway, so based on my own calculation, split our resources to other ridership goal or coverage goal, we're at about 30 to 35% on coverage and then 60 to 65% on ridership. The frequent service. So that's where we are. And then, this slide seems odd sitting here, but I really think it's useful, especially for your board and policy review, to understand who are currently using our services and how good our service is today. This is from on-board survey, I believe, done October 2024. It's pretty recent. So if you look at sort of the chart, and then the most people, I would say 3/4, use our service for work school purpose. And then a little bit slightly more than 3/4 has household income below 50 grand. And then more than 3/4 riders don't even have access to driving. And of course, most people are renters other than house owners. So you look through, of course, you probably know a lot of university students use our service, right? That's kind of a driving factor because they're relatively low income, no access to cars, and they go to school, sometimes work. They're renters. But again, even you move those students out of this chart, we still have a bigger portion, lower income, no access to cars, renters. Those are kind of our base riders. And then you look at their walking distance to a bus stop. Average, I would say a mean, not average, about 6 minutes. About half people, riders, within 6 minutes, and half more than 6 minutes. That's kind of the walking distance related to coverage. And then you look at the total travel time, trip time is, I think the average about 29 minutes, the mean is 20 minutes. But of course, when you think about our student riders, right, they use for short trip, from their apartment to school, quick ride. But overall, you look at, in terms of trip time and walking distance, they're pretty good level of service. But of course, I have to acknowledge those are riders. So the people who are using our service today, for the people who are not using our service for whatever reason, maybe too far, to a bus stop, or too long, or not even go to my destination, those are not here, right? So keep that in mind. Go ahead, Rich.
A quick question. So I was wondering when I was looking at this the other day, was this based off of Hughes phone poll?
Not the phone survey, it's the onboard. Every 2 years, we have surveyors riding our buses. They're asking riders to fill in surveys, yeah.
Do you remember what the sample size was for this?
But it's 13, I would say total 1,700, but some are incomplete. So we have about 1,300.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a big undertaking, but we do feel it's valuable to do frequently. Right? All right. And then going back to your policy, like a board ends policy, I kind of gone through and picked the keywords through under ridership or coverage, and you can tell we want both. There's no question about it. I mean, a lot of communities want both, right? And then you cannot just focus on ridership because that's a private business, and you cannot just focus on coverage. That's kind of not well use of resources. Anyway, and then you look at the chart. I apologize for the small font. That's the biggest I can get. But if you cannot read, I can read it for you. Like the first one is reducing environmental footprint, and the second one expand the labor mobility, and the third one help those who cannot drive, and then attract car owners to transit, increase customer satisfaction, increase ridership in general, use money wisely, and other. So that was the feedback from board members back in 2022. When Matt actually asked question, hey, could you prioritize your ends? Right, this is the chart he got. But you can tell, still mixed, but it's a leaning towards to ridership. And coverage is still important. But when I asked a different question at the same board retreat, I said, because we're talking about millage, long-range plan, we're talking about increase in budget, right? So that's the answer I got from every board member back at the time. So everybody agreed, we want to keep those service, social service needs roads, and then put the new resources into ridership goal. So that was clear. So also as a feedback into the long-range planning process. So, and then look at what riders and community told us. So this is from, the service requests from surveys and kind of combined, showing it on this graph. Pre-pandemic, you probably saw that before. It's sort of mixed, both ridership, coverage and ridership, and a little bit more on the ridership side. But during pandemic, you probably all remember all about coverage, access, right? Because people who don't have a car, cannot drive, they desperately need something. So that's all requests we got. I need a bus stop, bus here, or I need longer service hours. So that's pretty clear. And then during the long-range plan process, we got a lot of community engagement activities. We heard a lot from a lot of people. And also, there is mixed coverage and ridership, but a lot of focus on ridership. And then you hear those like, I want a high-frequency network, I want a bus rapid transit, express. And there's also a lot of equity related. They want transportation to address social equity gaps by providing better transportation. So that's what we heard from our riders and community. And then let's look at some of the challenges we have, opportunities as well. So this is a population density map from last census information. The darker red represent higher density, right? If you look at the bar, the legend, I would draw your attention to 6,000 people per mile, which is I consider marginally transit friendly. If you think of 6,000, that pretty much 10 units per acre. If you going up to 12,000, that could be 20 units. Yeah, that would be transit friendly. So if you look at that, if you can tell, east of US 23 at Gulf side, right? Along Gulf side, Washington, that's pretty, in Ann Arbor standard, Ann Arbor Ypsilanti standard, it's a pretty dense area. A lot of apartment buildings, but even that is only marginally transit friendly. 6,000 per square mile. So there are pockets of a higher density, but there's no clear corridor, the big area you can provide a decent, like a higher frequency service. That's our challenge. But that's how the community evolved in the last 100 years. It's all for cars, right? So definitely, and especially when the large employers, service centers, and they want to cheap land. They want to relocate somewhere else, like Scioto Township, Peaceville, somewhere. And then they come back and say, hey, I need a bus service. But during their development process, we try to tell them, you need to locate along the bus route. So then we can offer good service, right? But their clients need bus service. They don't have a car or something. So that's why when we design service, we have to go somewhere and do a big detour, cover those service centers. That's not a good practice. It's not good use of resources, right? If you read Jerry Walker's article or book, it's the linear, right? You need all the compact development along a linear line. Anyway, so those are kind of the challenges we have where, we cannot change it today, but of course we can influence in the future. So that's kind of what we are talking about, right? In order to achieve that ridership goal, we need to have a better land use and a coordination between land use and transportation planning. A good example on the right side, showing on the map, I think you're probably familiar with that. In the city of Ann Arbor, actually, this is almost like a final stage. They already did a presentation to the Planning Commission, I believe. So they recommend this a very, I mean, I wouldn't say very, but a much higher density mixed-use development. And if you look at those mixed-use development corridors, actually they are matching our long-range plan, higher frequency bus routes. So of course, we work with them to align their land use with our long-range plan. So that's a good thing to have a long-range plan before they do that, so we can influence their decision. Anyway, so this is really a good example, show how land use would benefit, right? I mean, both. If you know some details, actually, they propose by 2050 a minimum 43% increase in like a house unit, and up to 140% increase. So can you imagine, like a same space fitting in doubling or more than doubling people? So our ridership could, even just for that, could go up significantly. Of course, even better because they have the higher density development along our bus route. So we're really aligned to that. So hopefully other municipalities will do the similar land use plans, so we can start to work with them for the transit benefit too. And other things like a transit priority, you probably already heard, like a signal priority, transit signal priority, queue jump lanes, dedicated bus lane, and those things we also kind of try to partner with university and the city, MDOT, to make that happen. Because the same resource, if you can speed up buses, you can provide even more frequent service, right? And make service more attractive. And then there's also programs like fare programs to make transit more attractive, increase ridership. Let's move on. I don't know, this is probably you have seen this. This is called Washington County Opportunity Index Map. It basically is showing that if you look at the legend, the opportunity index, if it's low, that means so they need access to services, healthcare. They have a low access, right, to healthcare, jobs, education, and all different services. As you can tell, on the east side of this map, the opportunity index is very low, and they have a lot of needs there. But again, a lot of those areas, maybe a lower density development, they're not well positioned to be served by big buses. So, and certainly we heard a lot, like from the community, we need to help addressing those issues, like give them better access for transportation because they most likely don't have access to cars. They need transportation alternatives. And then, of course, like I said, it may be hard to put a big bus there, but there are other options. I use TheRide as an example. Back in 2019, we used to run 2 big buses in Peacefield, like only carrying like 3-4 people per hour. So we team up with Peacefield Township. We introduced TheRide to replace those 2 big buses, and at probably half the cost, but provide much more coverage. It's still serving the purpose. Of course, there are still gaps, don't get me wrong, but it's another way to provide a coverage without the big bus cost. And of course, the scooter sharing, bike sharing, ride sharing all become very popular these days, right? A lot of new technology, new ideas. The point I want to make is with those new ideas, new technology, it's not impossible to provide coverage at a lower cost. So something for you to think about it. Lastly, before we go into discussion and questions, I want to talk a little bit about long-range plan. I know you just got an update not long ago. So just for probably Georgia's benefit, and this is a long-range plan was approved back in 2022. We had a very robust public engagement. a lot of public feedback. So anyway, if you look at the map, so the two red lines are bus rapid transit, very frequent, higher speed transit connections. And the dark blue are priority frequent, like every 10-minute service. The light blue is high frequency, like every 15 minutes. And that's a kind of a network. The shaded yellow, gold are local bus or flex ride or something like other coverage. So as you can tell, we cover the entire 3 members of the authority and by certain type of transit service. And while we're providing a high frequency network. Like if you remember when I talking about what we heard from public during that engagement, yeah, there's a lot of focus on high frequency, right? Bus rapid transit. But also equity, like if you look at the chart down there, showing the 100% increase in service, but 123% increase in service in those low opportunity index area, the map I showed you just a minute ago. Of course, we project a significant ridership increase. There's benefit in terms of shifting people from driving to transit. For this plan, I want to point out, based on the same calculation, use the same methodology, the ridership, on ridership side, we have 85% resources on ridership, 15% on coverage. If you remember, when I say existing service, 30 to 35%, we did not reduce. It's just that we got a bigger, much bigger budget. So that exactly as you asked back in 2022, maintain the social service needs routes and add new resource to ridership. So that's the long range plan. That's the end of my my presentation. I think we, any questions or you want, oh, one more thing, sorry. And this actually, when I watch one of the videos Matt shared, Jerry Walker added a section to his book. If you have had any chance to read it, it's about access. It's a freedom, right? If a person has freedom, the transportation, like they can go anywhere, like within a short time, and they got freedom. They can go to jobs, education, service, all the shopping, right? So I just want to give you a couple examples. So this is a comparison between current service and a long-range plan. So if you see that person, like a very dark dot there, that's a Jane, anyway. So they call Jane a person coming, right, thank you, Matt. This is West Willow, actually. We use West Willow as an example. From there, so the color represent, 15 minutes range, within 15 minutes, where she can go, right? How big the area she can go by bus. So, and then of course, there's like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and 1 hour. You can tell the red is 1 hour. So from today can go only so far. With the long range plan can go all the way to Ann Arbor, like downtown. And in 45 minutes, that's all. So it really adds that access, right? Freedom to that neighborhood. This is just the West Willow example. And then you go to like another example is just for southwest Ann Arbor. You can tell the difference. So the change from a current service to the long-range plan service. And I got another one that's north east Ann Arbor. Now it's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Forrest, for a great presentation. You put a lot of work into this and effort, and I think it answered a lot of our questions, but I think we might have some more. Does anybody have any questions for Forrest? Susan?
Yeah, I concur. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I just to start with, just to make sure I understand, when you're talking coverage, you're talking routes where they go, Because to me, coverage also included that we added evening service.
Yep.
That's a coverage. That, am I using the same terminology?
Yeah,
Because in the old debate, do we go to a neighborhood where no one's ever going to ride the bus, but it's within a quarter mile of someone's house? That's
Absolutely.
a coverage.
Yeah.
Can you define what coverage
Yeah.
is?
That's a really excellent question. I think even when I calculated those things, it's hard to split, between coverage and ridership. Let's say frequency, higher frequency, so we know that's focused on ridership. So if we want to expand service to a low-density neighborhood, really no need to rent a big bus. And that's, for me, the coverage. We try to give people access to transportation, but it's not for ridership goal at all, because only carrying like probably 5, 10 people an hour. But coming to span is really, I think it's both. Because in order to attract more people to use transit other than driving, you need to give them a really viable option all the time. But they cannot give up a car if they don't have a good service on weekend or evening. So that's why the span is one for coverage as well, and also for ridership.
Okay.
Just because, like London, for example, if they only ran 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, they wouldn't be able to attract so many people, right? A lot of people will have to find other options for transportation. So that's why when I say 24/7, we have a really reasonable service 24/7, that make a difference. Because when people want to become a one-car family or just completely give up their car, they can rely on transit.
So just, I'm going to repeat what I think I heard is something like coverage could be day part as well as roads, which street we cover.
Right.
It could be both.
Yeah. And the ridership could be both too. like,
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the tension is kind of a false tension because they
Yep.
kind of intertwine.
Yep.
Another question that I had was, does the long-range plan, the 2045 plan, envision new areas that we're going to run buses in that we've never run before, or is it increased service where we've run it before?
Not particular within our service area, but we did, put a concept plan for regional service. If you recall, there's a big map showing park and ride service go to north, south, west, east, and there is also Ypsilanti connection to Wayne County and Ypsilanti connection to Detroit. So those are new, but we need to partner with RTA and with other stakeholders to implement those things.
So the debate that earlier boards had about coverage versus ridership, much of that's been resolved in our plan. The plan doesn't envision like dropping any roadways or, changing it by reducing in any areas. It's only adding. I think, is that the question of resources?
Even, I would say even for current service, we have to look at those low ridership routes. Because if we can find an alternative, provide a coverage, and allocate those big buses to somewhere else and for increasing ridership, we would recommend doing that too. But the coverage, yes, we will need to maintain the coverage. Let's say even our service standard, we require to provide a 90%. So we'll maintain coverage, but may not be same, right? Maybe flex ride, maybe something else. Yeah.
Okay, and I just have one more question and I'll stop
Nope,
hogging
nope.
the floor. When you describe the tension, and the percentages, say 35%
Sure.
versus 65%,
Yep.
we have to go to the voters every 5 years. And so we have to make a case. And so there's a tension we have versus other entities, other agencies that may have federal funding and may not have to justify, we really have to explain why we're important. And one measure we use is ridership. It's hard to communicate, well, we covered an area that might someday serve somebody. How does the funding figure into this in the tension point that you described? Again, the overlap between coverage and ridership. If we had let's say seldom, if our ridership never
Right.
hits pre-pandemic,
Sure.
and yet we added all this service.
Yep.
For instance, that would be a difficult communication to share with our community.
Absolutely.
So where does funding figure into that tension? Because I know we're getting back to the board and policy so that we understand
Sure.
kind of how that's the real world part of this.
I would say, yes, I agree. It's compared to pre-pandemic because we're living in a different world. I think Matt did a presentation last month talking about the remote work, the people, online shopping, whatever. But to me, the argument, let's say before and after we implement the millage plan. So use the weekend service as an example, right? So before, we have a ridership base. After we implement that, immediately we see like 30, 40% increase. So that's a good story to tell. That's to me, you compare it to if we don't have that service improvement, so people don't have access, or have challenges for jobs, especially on the weekend, right? Now we have that service. I think that's a good example, just to approve the service proposal we asked voters to support. Actually, it's really useful, just because, like I said, we listen, we implement it, and they use that. So I don't know, we can, hopefully by then we'll recover all the ridership. There is a challenge with the new environment we're in right now. But we do see, I would say gradually, we do see ridership continue to increase. Like even this year, this fall, we observed more than 10% compared to last year. And that's a good trend. So we can demonstrate our value through the trend, other than just strictly compared to pre-pandemic. Because I think a lot of, not just the transit, a lot of industry may not even compare to pre-pandemic anymore. They compare to last year, they compare to last quarter, right? So that would be my take on that. Thank you.
Rich?
Yeah, thanks for this. So I just really had one major question, is really around the impact of primary transit hubs. Because I know, if I remember correctly, I think in the LRP, there was one potentially at Briarwood we were considering, like that general area. And I know a lot of this really depends on the community makeup. And for us, versus say like Manhattan, like you said, we have a lot of rural areas. Yep. And I'm wondering, for our community, do we know how much of an impact a transit hub has on this frequency and coverage, right? Because for me, I'm thinking of things like travel time to get from point A to point B, and that can be really affected by the options of transfers. Because right now, the way it works, I think right now is Lake Transit and Ipsy Transit Center are the main kind of transit hubs that we have.
Sure.
And the only other times that folks can actually change to another route is, frankly, I think one, and it's if two routes happen to intersect at some bus stop. Right. And so I was just kind of curious if we have the data or the calculations that say, like, because we always talk about the cost to implement versus the impact in the end, right? And so is it something worthwhile for us as a board to consider building more primary transit hubs sprinkled out through the community, which then maybe means that the number of buses that we have to buy in the end kind of is offset, because we can actually transfer more people along different routes to get them from point A to wherever it is that they need to get to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You look at a large system, if they have a subway system, you cannot continue a bus ride onto tunnel, right? So you have to transfer. The reason people don't mind transfer because they're so frequent. So when you walk out one bus, go to the train, it comes every 5 minutes or every 1 minute or 2 minutes. So that's kind of the goal we try to achieve for the long range plan. We build a high frequency network. Of course, we still introduce transit hubs. Like there are 4 additional transit hubs, more like outside, like a little bit outside, so other services can connect to that. So once you have a higher frequency network, people transfer, yes, they have to wait for a few minutes, but right now we have to have a hub and spoke. just because we run every half hour. If people miss their transfer, they will have to wait about 25 or 30 minutes. But if you run every 15 minutes or even 5 minutes, absolutely they don't mind. I mean, the hubs, if you can tell, they're connecting to a higher frequency, like especially bus rapid transit, right? We assume that's going to be every 5 minutes. So if people coming from Peacefield and they're on FlexRide or they're on something, they get up to their transfer point, they don't typically need to wait that long. A few minutes, they will jump on a bus and go to downtown University, right? So yes, the hub is important, especially for people transferring. Like if we have a nicely laid grid network, definitely, my God, you have to have a very frequent service so people can transfer. Then you don't have to worry about, the connections, the wait time.
Is that good?
And I'm sure I'll have questions later, but I want to give the floor.
But
to
I
someone else.
do, yeah, I do. I do want to point out, since you mentioned the hub, the transit hub, Bravo Mall, we're actually in the process of working with the private developer, but we don't have a lot to share. It's very preliminary, that conversation. But as you can tell, some of the old mall or plazas being redeveloped, right? In Bravo Mall, there are like a development coming in, like an upper subs development, and it's huge. And then they're talking about other parking lot being redeveloped as a residential, as something else. So there are some opportunities we can work with them and establish that kind of a transit hub. And first, park and ride, right? Frequency connection. So there's a lot of benefit. Thank you.
We have Mike on the line who'd like to ask a question,
Okay.
and then Jesse.
Thank you, Forrest. Very interesting presentation. And I was particularly fascinated by your exhibit on existing riders. I hadn't seen this kind of information before. And as I recall, you said survey was done in October, is that right?
October 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do it roughly every 2 years?
Yep.
I think it'll be very, very interesting to compare the next survey, which would presumably reflect the new service that we put in around October 2024. Compared with that, we'll have basically 2 years, a little 2 year plus of experience to see how these graphs have changed. And I'm particularly going to be interested in the access to driving chart. That seems to me, just by looking at it without having the knowledge that you do, it just looks like a great opportunity to bring people out of their cars, onto the buses. It will benefit the area in so many ways. Of course, by taking somebody out of their car and putting them on a bus, that will do great improvement to the carbon emissions that our area is producing, in addition to increasing the number of riders. But do you think we will be seeing some movement in that area when we look at this again in 2 years?
Oh, certainly, in all the categories, we'll see the difference. Actually, we do comparison to previous years. We always have we had this for a decade, right? Like 5, 6 times. So we always compare. And I'm glad you mentioned that access to driving. Actually, that number, the yes number dropped from last survey. We did had a conversation the other day. We dig into some numbers. The survey consultants, and they find the car ownership in Michigan went up quite a bit.
Probably had something to do with the pandemic, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, the pandemic, the fuel costs, the different things, and the income level. next 2 years, when we compare, I agree, because for October, we just implemented some service, and a lot of people probably didn't know yet. But to next one, certainly we're going to see some interesting results.
Yeah, I would think it would be the fact that we instituted a big expansion
Yeah,
right about that time.
right.
Going 2 years later will be more revealing than maybe the 2 years
Yeah,
intervals in the past. And I presume part of what we are trying to accomplish is bringing people out of cars. And you did talk a little bit about that earlier, and maybe that can be a topic that I could explore a little bit more with you. What's the most important factors that you look at there? Because to me, that's really a key part of what we need to do to increase our ridership and also to be better stewards of the planet.
yeah, absolutely. I think like I said, the city, some of the new development, especially in Ann Arbor, will make a difference too. Some bigger, higher density development.
Yeah, and
Agreed.
of course, that's what Ann Arbor is trying to do. And let's hope they're successful. And I'm sure we coordinate in terms of providing service to more densely populated areas. Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much, Forrest.
Thank you. Now, Jesse has questions?
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to an earlier slide, the statistics you had on existing riders, and had the information like how far they were from a transit stop, whether they were transit dependent, and there were. I was wondering that was that information our entire system in aggregate. Was it at all weighted based on the regions identified in the Washtenaw County Opportunity Index, and do we have an analysis of how riders are being how current riders are being served by region? Because I'm thinking that as a because Ann Arbor being the largest population center, as I kind of mentioned last week, I wonder whenever we're looking at data about our system in aggregate, I feel like we're probably just looking at Ann Arbor and not actually seeing how it's affecting people in individual regions.
Yes, Jesse, it's a good point. We do have, if we want to dig into this data, we do have, we can ask the consultants to go in, and we typically receive the raw data. We can do all the analysis we want as long as the data is available. In this case, we have a separate data for different region. Of course, the sample size is much smaller because, as you can tell, the population, the ridership in Ann Arbor account for a big portion. But it still will give us some useful information for sure.
Yeah, I think it would. I really think that in order for me personally to make educated decisions as we go forward, I want that that more parse data is going to be more important, because even like a transit dependent rider in Ann Arbor who you identified as most likely a college student who didn't bring a car with them to go to college, is going to have very different a very different experience from a transit dependent person living in Park Ridge. So and the also thing I didn't see on there was how people's day to day. We have the work in school, but other appointments like groceries and medical appointments weren't included in there. And I really will be interested in seeing that data to see where we're at and using that to inform how we move forward and make further decisions.
Yep. That's good point. We can dig into more
Are you satisfied, Jesse?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I just didn't want to cut you off if you needed something else. Rich, you wanted to go again?
Anyone else have questions before I go again? No? Okay. So to go back to the primary transfer hubs question.
Sure.
I guess for me, one of the things I'm just trying to figure out as we, as a board, have to consider this whole coverage versus free ridership debate is, do we, and you might not be able to answer this now, but do we know how much a hub actually has an impact on that versus ridership versus coverage, right? Because versus, say, more buses. Because if spending more focus in dollars on a hub, like say with our existing network, actually increases ridership or the ability to cover more expansive real estate, I guess, by say 10%, 50%, I don't know, some percentage increase, then I think that's pretty darn interesting compared to maybe if we add 50 more buses to our fleet. And that's the kind of math, I guess, that I'm just trying to figure out, because I don't know what the cost is to build like a mini transit center, say at Briarwood, because I don't imagine whatever we're planning for Briarwood or those other 4, I think, transit hubs, is they're going to be like YTC and Blake, or they're like smaller, and maybe there's, instead of being able to support like 15 to 20 buses at a time, it might be only 5 buses have to go around the platform.
Yep.
And so the cost is lower. So that's the part that I'm just kind of curious is like, for me, the big question I have is like, how much of an impact does these additional transit hubs have on either or ridership or coverage? And like I said, it might not be something you can answer now, and
it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
I would say definitely will serve both purposes, right? If you have a hub, you can connect to something like FlexRide to there, they can transfer frequent service, which serves like a coverage purpose. But and then you also facilitate transfer between the high frequency routes, and that kind of a benefit on ridership side. Depending on if it's a downtown hub, it's more like a ridership, right? If it's outside, could be both. Yeah. But that's an interesting point to think about. Yeah.
Are there any other questions for us? Susan?
I kind of hogged it earlier. Once again, Rich has sparked me. You do this every time. The university has proposed some very ambitious plans for itself, including what I would consider to be campus expansions, for the new dorms are a good example, as well as a lot of transit opportunities.
Yep.
One of which included like new transit centers.
Yep.
How does our discussion around ridership and coverage interrelate to the second bus system that we have running at the same time? Because, for instance, one of the hubs we have is the Central Campus Transit Hub, or there's a transfer point in front of the Art Museum, and we're transferring through systems.
Sure.
How does their proposed 2050 plan interrelate with our own discussion? Because that came up subsequent to our long-range plan.
Yeah. Well, at the time we developed our long-range plan, the Campus 2050 was not there yet, right? But anyway, so just look at, they don't have any details in terms of their bus network, except lines on the map showing that they call everything called bus rapid transit right now. The ATS, the autonomous transit system, the train, whatever, elevated, autonomous train system, yeah, that would be a huge impact, But again, we cannot plan our system based on that yet until they're going to move forward. So the point I try to make is if there is a connection, a fixed skyway connection, we may have some opportunity to just connect our buses to the train system, depending on the capacity, right? We don't want to dump everybody on their system and overcrowd. But I think at this moment, like when we look at our long-range plan, look at their plan, it's pretty consistent. We can find some synergy, like bus rapid transit. Where we overlap, we can team up, we can go to city, we can talk to MDOT, whoever owns the right of way. See how the whole bus lane or transit signal priority can benefit both systems. In terms of the coordination, yes, we definitely need to coordinate in terms of schedule transfer. Like I use the Medicine Transit Center, the new transit center they propose. We do have buses going there. We're already in discussion how we can have our buses go there and making sure we can connect to their service. And of course, there's a big destination is like a student apartment, right? So we can take those students to shops, to somewhere else, and their buses will take their student to campus. And that's their role. But our role is take students for some other travel purpose. So there are certainly things we can work together, but right now, when we look at their plan, it's really unclear what they're planning to do in terms of the transit system, except the ATS system, right? So that's a big unknown. But I think it's important for us to work together with them. Yeah, we don't want to duplicate services. Yeah. But that's a good point.
Yeah, the dorms are now away from central campus.
Yep.
I mean, much of this is now no longer in some centralized place. And what's challenging, sort of gets back to my earlier question about day part, the university is very active 9 months a year and very quiet 3 months a year.
Yep.
And so the more we look at what coverage is, does coverage include reduction during summer months, increase during fall months?
Right.
It's just, is coverage a day part question or is it a street coverage? We cover more streets than we used to.
I don't know, everybody knows, we reduce to some degree a few buses during the summer time, try to manage in that, just because we don't want to run the same frequency and there's no university students using it, right? We can certainly coordinate, like maintain the coverage, but reduce frequency. I mean, especially for the high ridership with student high ridership, right? We can manage that, but only to some degree. Yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Forrest, for an excellent
Thank you,
presentation.
everybody.
You've given us a lot to think about. All right, we're going to move on then to 7.1, our quarterly one service report, and that is Mr. George Brooks.
Good evening, everyone. Let's move to your packet, page 91. I'm going to give a report on the FY25 Q1 service report. A lot of good things and a couple of challenges I have to report on. A couple new changes. We started gathering the data for collisions as compared to accidents. Our boardings are up, complaints are down, and compliments are up. A couple good things to report on page 92 as the slide states. Our ridership continues to go up, and also our mean distance between failure is greatly improving. We've had a 26% improvement in mean distance between failure. For those of you who don't know what mean distance between failure is, it's the amount of in-service failures you have as you're running service. And our current mean distance between failure is at 24,440 miles as compared to the last quarter of 20,438 miles. Our fixed ridership, as I stated, is continuingly growing. It's good news there. Cost of boarding, the more ridership you have, the cost goes down. As you can see, we're slightly going down. Our fixed route on-time performance, we normally shoot for 80%. In the last quarter, we went down a little bit, but we had a lot of construction going on, so we were negatively affected by the various construction sites. Since the last quarter, 3 of our construction sites have been removed, detours have been removed, and as you can see, the direct correlation of our on-time performance going up to over 85%, which is a really good metric. Going on to the report on the MV part of our rides. Total ADA rides is remaining steady with a slight uptick. Cost of boarding has really had no change. Trip denials remain very low with our MV ride service. The A-Ride ridership continues to slightly trend up. Gold Ride is flat. It's pretty much staying the same. I already hit on that. Van pool continues to, it's trending up, but it's not trending up much. It's pretty much staying the same. A slight downtick, but generally in the same range, quarter over quarter. The challenging part that I earlier stated has been in the FlexRide part of our service. We did not anticipate having so much ridership over the holidays. We realized, or we had 500 ride requests per day. We just didn't have the data or information for that. And subsequently, we had a poor quarter in my eyes regarding meeting the demand of our customers. The good news is, I think we're very close to overcoming it. In fact, since January 16th, we're meeting coverage by 99%, which we weren't when we started the service. Good news is we're overcoming the challenges. The bad news is we had some challenges. So I'm pretty happy the direction we're going with FlexRide. Was worried in the beginning, but they've been very responsive to our needs. Myself and Forrest, we've been working with FlexRide to not only provide more service, but to get them to ramp up their efficiency, more ride sharing instead of just taking one customer at a time. Try to use two or three customers at a time to meet that increased demand. We've scaled up resources from 4 to 6 vehicles to 8 to 10. And with the data that we harvested over the past holidays, we will plan better next year for the holidays to meet that increased need. So overall, I think we've had a very good quarter with a little bit of challenges, but I definitely think we're going in the right direction to overcome the challenges. This last slide is the D2A2 ridership. Even though it's not, under our responsibility anymore, we wanted to share this information with you. As you can see, the ridership is trending higher in all capacity. And anybody have any questions before I close out? Go ahead.
Actually, before I pose it to George, it's actually a question more for the board to see what your thoughts are. So I think one of the challenges I have is I don't know what the benchmark is, so I was wondering if you thought it'd be worthwhile to ask George to add, like for instance, like cost of revenue hour, where it says it's right now $152.11. Like if there is a benchmark for transit organizations our size that we can then measure, because it might be that the industry benchmark is like $180 and we're below that, but I don't know like if we're above or below and what to compare it to, because I just look at these and go like, well, it seems reasonable, but I don't have an idea whether that's true or not.
I would be curious to know if understanding benchmarks from other agencies is worth comparing. I'd like to understand more about the question that Rich is asking.
We can do some looking into that to see if there's comparables of cost. And I can get back to you on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because even like the on-time performance, like 82% seems decent, but because I don't know if we're ever able to achieve like 100%, right? And so maybe knowing what the benchmark is and also what our target is, like, hey, we're always aiming actually for 80% and we're 2% over that. And be like, okay, that's great. We're exceeding our baseline. But I think that'd be great, helpful.
Are you speaking on fixed route when it comes to on-time
Oh, sorry, yeah, I was
performance?
looking at the fixed route stuff, because I think like for the Gold Ride and the other ones, yeah, I think I'm primarily just looking for a fixed route.
Yeah, I can speak on that a little bit. If you look about over the country, industry standard, most organizations shoot for 70% on-time performance. Probably about 2 years ago, we started talking about what should be our goal, and we chose to step it up a notch. We said, let's make our goal not 70%, but 80%. So that's what we try to shoot for. Beat the industry standard, make our standards higher. So we shoot for 80%, and as you can see, this last quarter, we did a really good job.
Yeah, so I think if maybe we could get that information, just like maybe even added in the label section, just like what the industry standard and what our internal goal is, just something to ponder. I think I would find that personally very useful.
And I'd be interested too, I mean, I don't know if we benchmark other agencies for our ridership, and we show ours going here and theirs going there. If we all centralize through SEMCOG, or there's information sharing, whatever is shared from the other agencies that we're benchmarking ridership trends, it would be helpful just to understand kind of where they are and where we are, as much as is readily available. I certainly don't want you digging, but if it's readily available through a centralizing agency, that'd be great.
Yep. Yeah, the industry standard as far as like recovery from our ridership, it's all over the board, all over America. I think San Francisco is above where pre-COVID ridership. However, that's an outlier. Most of the country is pretty close to where we're at. In fact, I think we're actually doing a little bit better than most of the country. But that can be confirmed through other data.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Brooks?
Hi, Kathleen, I have one. This is Mike.
Yes, thanks, Mike. I don't see your face, but Deb just put a sign up saying you're there.
Well, yeah, my hand is raised, at least on my screen. Anyway, thank you, George. There's lots of very interesting data that you have here. And I'd like you to go back to the fixed route data page. And there's maybe something that I don't understand here. Looking at the box on the lower left-hand side, you have, trends, boardings, complaints per 100,000, compliments per 100,000. And I don't see those numbers in the chart, and there's probably something I don't understand. The biggest one that's very different. You look at, it says compliments per 100,000 boardings are up 200% compared to first quarter 24. But I look at the chart, and what I see is down 60% in that last column at the very bottom. Am I not comparing the two right numbers?
Yeah, I see the disparity in what you're talking about. I think what I'd like to do for the next quarter is to make sure that when we compare to the quarter that's listed, such as quarter one, that we would have that column there to compare, because the numbers don't jive. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah, the same on the boardings, but not a huge difference. like
Right.
a big plus to a big minus. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
I could better speak on it if I had included FY 2024 with Q1 row there.
Yeah,
So we'll make that adjustment for the next
Okay.
report.
okay, thanks, George.
Yep.
Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you so much, George. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is 7.2 low no update, and that is Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. So like George, I have some good news and some challenging news to share on the Low-No grant update. So the good news is all of the work that we have been putting in over the last several months to submit our grant application for our Low-No grant award has been submitted officially to the FTA. So that process unfortunately took several months back and forth with the FTA, but we just stayed diligent and finally got the okay to submit it last week. So that's the good news. It's officially submitted. It has to go through FTA Region 5, and then once it goes from there, it will go to headquarters in Washington, D.C. That process usually takes several weeks in a normal year. This year, last week, we got some new information, also good news and bad news. Good news to have information that we weren't exactly sure how some of these executive orders and things were going to actually apply. We did get some clarity from the US DOT this last week. The DOT has initiated a new process on how to move forward with applying some of the executive orders in practice and what the activities will be. So what's going to happen is that the DOT has indicated that if we have a grant award, when we submit applications for those grants, if they have certain criteria included in the original award, like several things that we've all heard about, Justice 40, DEI, things like that, they're going to go through every application and look at them in detail to determine what parts of the application for the funding are not in line with executive orders. What we understand is that they can do several things. If they identify that the application complies with executive orders, they'll approve the application and it will move forward and then be eligible for us to obligate the funds. We're confident that the low-no funding will be scrutinized. It's one of the awards that was very specifically addressing some of these criteria in the notice of opportunity, the notice of funding opportunities. So we know they're going to review these. There's a couple more options that they have stated is that when they go through the application, if there are things that they think do not comply with the current executive orders, they actually are saying that they will send them back and flag the items that they determine are not in compliance. They'll send them back to the agency so that we can amend it, if you will, or either take out the parts and reapply with the parts that do comply, or we can try to use the funding that's there on other projects or things that are already written into the grant. So an example would be our low-no award application includes hydrogen buses and hybrid buses. It's potentially possible that they might look at that and say, hydrogen doesn't meet the criteria, it's non-compliant, but hybrid does. If that's the case, they might send it back to us and say, you can still get the funding and you're okay with all of your hybrid elements, but all of your hydrogen elements have to be revisited, and you can either apply for more hybrid buses or give up the funding for the hydrogen and not do anything and only order the hybrid buses you asked for. So we may have options to continue to maximize this funding, but there will be decisions that we will have to make if that happens or when that happens. So we don't know if that's the case. That was just an example of what could happen with the low-no application, but those are primarily the elements of our application right now. And like I said, now we wait. So we've submitted it. I presume it's probably heading to headquarters with either this week, next week, once it gets out of Region 5. And it will probably get caught in the review process because it is one of those funding opportunities that we are pretty confident will be reviewed. And then once that occurs, we'll get some kind of correspondence back from them, and we will respond accordingly. So that's where we're at. Just to note, we did submit for 21 million of the 25 million. I think I've mentioned that before, but that's the other 4 million we did not submit for yet because we still have, it's still in the award. We just haven't applied to use it yet because it was related to the fueling facility, which requires construction, which will require some kind of NEPA review. So in order to move as much forward as quickly as we could, we separated that out. So depending on what they say about the current application, if that's a go on all the hydrogen elements and the hybrid elements, we'll be starting NEPA review and getting ready to process the rest of the 4 million following that. But we'll wait to see what they say.
Thank you. Rich, you have a question?
So if they come back and say, we have to basically potentially drop the hydrogen bus option, do you need board input in that? Or is that just something that you all will just say, like, we will make a decision and move forward?
Yeah, so do you want to respond to that, or would you like me to give my interpretation?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
It depends. We need to look back at what action the board did or did not take in October of '23 when we were making the decision to move forward with the grant application. And I will confess to a little bit of amnesia. I remember having those discussions with you. I can't remember if you voted on something specifically or if you more or less kind of nodded and said, yes, go ahead with that direction in the grant submission. If it was a nod, then hypothetically the decision may rest with me. If you voted on something and we have to effectively change what the grant is away from what you voted for, that makes it a little more complicated. I may need to come back to you. We just haven't gone back and checked the records yet. And I want to stress, Dina's scenario is plausible but hypothetical at this point. We aren't going to hear anything on our project. We don't expect for months. I expect actually this is going to get drug out for a while. We should learn patience. Should maybe take up meditation on this one. It may be a while. And we really don't know what we're going to get coming back. The memo she's referring to, and we're happy to share it, is it still leaves some things unclear. Their reference to congressional statute, and they're only changing things that fall outside of statute, which means they're kind of vulnerable to the whims of the executive branch. But our program was the low-no program. That was a program created by, authorized, and appropriated by Congress. We already have our award. Is that in statute or out of statute? Don't know. How does the administration feel about hydrogen? We don't know. How do they feel about hybrids? We don't know. They've never said anything about either technology. So her scenario, her hypothetical is quite possible. We won't know for some time what we're actually faced with. It's possible they may rubber stamp it and say, okay, here you go, and just pass us through, in which case we kind of dodge the bullet and we move forward. Let's all hope for that one, right? If they don't, we'll certainly come back to you and let you know, okay, here's the situation we're in. In terms of the actual decision, we kind of got to figure out what would we do, how would we do it. I have never in my career been faced with a situation like this. There's no standing operating procedure for this kind of a thing. I've never had them come back and say, we're unilaterally changing the terms of the contract you were already awarded. Do you want to negotiate with us? Yeah, uncharted territory. So we will certainly come back to you to get that answer, but it's kind of early days. Like I think we got this memo last week, this week, something like that. So
Yeah, earlier this week, I think, maybe.
Good question. Any other questions from the board? Mike or Jesse? I want to make sure I don't see them, so. All right. Thank you so much, Dina. We appreciate that. Next is our favorite conversation, legislative updates. It's Mr. Piper.
Thank you very much. Just had a couple of points I wanted to add in addition to what Dina said. First of which is an appropriations update. I think in months prior, we had been talking about the Congress using continuing resolutions to fund the federal government. March 14th, the last CR was set to expire. On the 14th, Congress did pass and President Trump signed a continuing resolution to extend funding throughout FY25. Basically maintains levels that were existing at FY24, slight increase in formula funds for the FTA. Really, I view that as a positive. We'll know some sense of comfort for the rest of the year. 2026, FY 2026 will be a big year. We have reauthorization coming up, which is the 5-year Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act. The agency as a whole will be really speaking to members of Congress and elected officials and stakeholders, trying to impress them and note the importance of public transit funding in that. We will actually be going to DC in May too with APS, and I'm sure that will be something that we will be discussing with our members of Congress and delegation there. One of the other things I did want to note with the continuing resolution that was passed was that any earmarks that were earmarked for FY24 did not make it through the CR. That does not impact us. The YTC earmarks were in years prior, but just something worth note that if any members of Congress were awarded an earmark for 24, did not make it through the CR. Looking towards kind of some things that we're doing right now on the federal level, it is earmark season. So we are working on an earmark and have submitted an earmark to Senator Peters' office for some funding with the YTC, particularly related to security upgrades, both in the current YTC and some equipment that can be transferred to the new YTC. So lots going on the federal level. We'll be sure to continue update on that. I did want to provide just a brief update on the state level. So last week, Matt, Kathleen, and I were in Lansing as part of the MPTA Advocacy Day. We had productive meetings with a lot of members of our delegation as well as House leadership. Overall, really good conversations, I think more or less educating them on the importance of transit funding. For our delegation, that's a pretty sound issue for them. I think they get it. It was really nice to speak to House leadership and explain to them the importance of public transit funding, particularly related to the LBO. That was one of the key messages we were focusing on. And additionally, yesterday, the House did pass a $3.1 billion road funding package that was not really great to public transit. It only included roughly $50 million to the Comprehensive Transportation Fund. Just want to reassure everyone, this is very much still a starting point. That now goes to the Senate. The Senate will most likely come up with their own version, and a lot of the negotiations will take place. So just you'll probably see things in the media about road funding passage, and just know this is still very much the start of this process.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mike. Rich.
Lori, sorry. Apparently I'm full of questions today. Have you heard any potential rumblings about earmarks prior to 2024?
In the memo, it did say earmarks prior to 2024 are safe.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you.
Hi, Kathleen.
Mike. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, I have an earmark question too, Jeff. The 2024 earmarks were just thrown aside. They're not there anymore. Is there anything that has been said about 2025? I mean, they didn't like earmarks for 2024. Are they going to like them for 2025 or 26? Or
we don't know yet. I think we're proceeding as putting in our application to our members and keeping our fingers crossed that they will make it to final funding.
To be determined.
To be determined, correct.
Deb, any other online? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience as we navigate that this evening. So if there are no more questions, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We're going to move on to the CEO report. That's Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you can tell, there's a lot going on, but there's not a whole lot in the CEO report. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about what's in the packet or anything else that the board may have questions on.
For me, I only had one question. So in previous, we've been seeing a consistent report on the Blake Transit Center and their updates, but that wasn't in this one. Is that just because it's stagnant?
That's what we're going to be talking about in closed session in a few minutes.
Okay.
And Matt, I had one question for you, having to do with the work that's going to be done on State Street, which includes a dedicated bus lane, which is a new thing for us. But obviously the university runs buses, probably a lot more buses on State Street than we do. What kind of coordination did we do with them, and how did that work? I was just curious.
Sure. This is kind of a project development in Ann Arbor story, and I'll start, and Forrest can jump in to correct me when I get it wrong. Essentially, this is a university-driven project we are piggybacking on. It is one bus lane northbound because their buses are only running northbound on State Street. We're more than happy to be a part of that. It sort of increases the number of buses that have some freedom through that street. The city, the DDA are also big partners in this. We have a couple bus stops going southbound on State Street in that section of campus. And part of the project is also bringing in bike lanes. And we will be paying a fair chunk for the bus stop improvements that we're using exclusively, which seems fair, right? Like, we're the only buses using them. But essentially, we're being allowed to use the northbound bus lane and bus stops at no cost. So very much a university-driven project, but we are working with them sort of behind the scenes on broader bus lane plans and seeing how, hopefully this one project is very successful. It might be something that could be replicated elsewhere.
Thanks, sounds good.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll close this area and we will move on to, there are no emergent items, and we're going to move on to closing items. Action item recap, that's Deb.
Thank you. The first thing I had down was that all three of the monitoring reports were all approved as A, so we will get those uploaded on the website. And I had that George is going to look at adding information on fixed route benchmarks and also look into some industry standard benchmarks to possibly include in service report metrics. And Matt, I didn't know, did you kind of waffled a little bit? Are we going to be looking on the board voting approval on the Low-No grant and get that back next month, or?
Specifically, I'm going to ask Deborah Holt to look into what happened
That was
in
what I wanted to
October of
confirm.
2023. And when I'm back next week, she can brief me on the subject.
Perfect, and that was what I had. Thank you.
That boomeranged on you. Do you have something, Rich?
Oh, yeah, I was wondering, does the board think it's worthwhile to see if Forrest can look into the, I guess, the benefit or cost between having more bus transit hubs versus, like, its impact basically on ridership versus coverage? Because I think that's actually a pretty important piece of data that we need to consider as we move into those deeper discussions. Because I think they will be coming to us, of course. It's just like, well, you may want to buy more buses based on the way things are right now. I don't, it's just like, what? But I'm just saying, like, if, as we have this discussion, right, because the frequency will evolve, like, potentially buying more resources, which to me is like more fixed route buses potentially to do that.
Yeah, I'm wondering what the timeline for something like that, like, is that an emergent, like, within the next 6 months, or are we looking, is that a discussion for the ends? What is the board thinking on that question?
I don't know what our timing is overall for some
Because
decision on that. Is it just based on the ends for this ridership versus coverage? I assume so, right?
Well, it's whatever the board wants. I'm just trying to figure out what it is the board wants.
Oh.
Go ahead, Forrest.
I can make it work. Anyway, so I think maybe I can have an offsite conversation with Rich and understand what exactly you're looking for. Maybe I can explain more to you how potential the impact's gonna be. Does that work?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
So that's everything for the action item recap. The topics for the next meeting are communication and support to the board, 2.9, that's a policy we'll be reviewing. We'll also be reviewing the sustainability policy, 2.11. We're going to start hearing about transit funding, part 1. So that looks like it's going to be a heavy chunk of our time. And then in the future, we will get to determining reasonableness, I promise you. We are now looking at a closed session, and if you'll give me just a moment, I have to read this exactly. So we need to take a roll call vote to go into closed session. Pursuant to 8D and 8C of the Open Meetings Act, the closed session is for strategy connected to real estate projects and information on the collective bargaining process overview. I need to go person by person to receive this vote, so I'm going to read off your name and state yes or no if you're willing to go into closed session. Mr. Mike Alamang?
Yes.
Chris Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Simivar? Yes. Ms. Julie Brand?
Yes.
Mr. Jesse Miller? Is he still with us? I can't hear you. Yeah, I'm getting
I'm here,
there.
but I can't vote.
Okay, and then Mr.
I'm not allowed to vote.
Yep.
Okay. And then Ms. Susan Pale,
Yes.
Ms. Kyra Sims,
Yes.
Ms. Georgia Valentine,
Yes.
and then I am also a yes. So we are now going into the open meeting. We'll be going across the hall, or are we having it in here? Okay. All right, everybody. If you need to take a bio break, now is a good time to do that. Thank you, everyone. We are back into session, our closed session, and we are on to 9.4, public comment. Deb, is there anybody online for public comment?
We do not have anybody online for public comment.
We will close public comment, and I will take a motion for adjournment. Ira, seconded by Rich. All those in favor, raise your hand. And we are. Thank you, everybody.